If the Red Wedding had never happened in Game of Thrones, the entire trajectory of Westeros would have changed drastically. The air at the Twins was thick with tension, but not the kind that led to betrayal. Robb Stark, the young wolf, stood before Walder Frey, apologizing for breaking his marriage pact. Instead of bloodshed, there was cold diplomacy. Lady Catelyn Stark had worked tirelessly to mend the relationship with House Frey, offering Edmure Tully as a groom for one of Lord Walder's daughters. It had taken days of negotiations, and while Lord Frey was insulted, he was also pragmatic. He accepted the arrangement, knowing that siding with the Starks would keep him in power when the war ended. Edmure Tully and Roslyn Frey were wed, and the feast went on without hidden daggers, crossbows, or slaughter. The banners of the North and Riverlands still flew high. The night ended with drunk lords and satisfied soldiers, and House Stark emerged stronger than before. With his forces intact and his alliances steady, Robb's war against the Lannisters continued. He had no idea that fate had just given him another chance. The morning after Edmure Tully's wedding, Robb Stark stood atop the battlements of the Twins, overlooking the green fork of the Trident. His army, battered but unbroken, stretched across the riverbanks. It was a force still feared throughout Westeros. Northern warriors hardened by war, river lords sworn to House Tully, and seasoned knights loyal to their young king. Lady Catelyn Stark watched from beside him, her eyes full of worry. "We have won a great victory by avoiding bloodshed here," she said, "but this war is far from over, Robb." Robb knew she was right. The Lannisters were still entrenched in King's Landing, their power growing with every alliance and scheme. Tywin Lannister was a man who planned decades ahead, and Robb knew he could not afford to give him time. He needed to act fast. Across the hall, Rose Bolton watched the celebration with cold detachment. He had expected the Red Wedding to unfold in blood, but instead it had turned into an alliance-reinforcing event. The betrayal he had planned with Tywin Lannister and Walder Frey never came to pass. Rose had counted on betraying the Starks to secure his hold on the North, but without the massacre, he had to reconsider his moves. His bastard son, Ramsay Snow, was still terrorizing the Dreadfort and playing his twisted games. Rose had planned to place him in Winterfell after the Starks were wiped out, but now Winterfell was still theirs to reclaim. Bolton remained quiet, concealing his disappointment, but his mind was already working on another. 2 days after the wedding, Robb gathered his bannermen. "We march to River Run first," he declared, "then to Harrenhal. The Lannisters will pay for what they have done to our family, to our people." His lords roared in agreement. Harrenhal, the cursed ruin that had changed hands several times during the war, was currently held by Gregor Clegane and a small Lannister garrison. Retaking it would give Robb a strategic advantage and cut off Lannister supply lines in the Riverlands. As they prepared to march, Catelyn Stark approached her son once more. "There is something else," she said. "You should send a message to Winterfell. We must know if Bran and Rickon are alive." Robb nodded. If his brothers lived, he needed to reclaim their home. If they were dead, he needed to avenge them. Either way, the North belonged to the Starks, and he would make sure it stayed that way. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister sat in the Red Keep, reading a raven's message from the twins. His golden eyes narrowed as he absorbed the words. No Red Wedding, no betrayal, no massacre. The Stark army was still intact. The Northern Riverlands were still united. His plan had failed. Tywin exhaled long and slow and turned to his son Tyrion. "Robb Stark is still alive," he said, "and he marches south." Tyrion leaned back in his chair, watching his father closely. "I imagine that's bad news for us." Tywin didn't respond immediately. He closed his eyes, calculating. "We must draw them into a battle of our choosing. If we let them dictate the war, we lose. We need another strategy. Far to the north, beyond the wall, Jon Snow had no idea how much the world had changed in the south. He had infiltrated the wildlings, earning their trust, and he had fallen for Ygritte. But his duty to the Night's Watch remained. The White Walkers were gathering in the darkness. Winter was coming, but Westeros was still bleeding itself dry in war. Robb Stark did not yet know it, but his greatest battle was not against the Lannisters. It was against time itself. Tywin Lannister sat at the head of the war table in the Red Keep, his fingers steepled together in thought. The Red Wedding had not happened. Robb Stark was still alive, his army still a threat. Across the table, Kevan, Lannister and Tyrion exchanged wary glances, waiting for the inevitable outburst. But Tywin did not rage. He did not slam his fist on the table. He simply thought, cold and calculating. "We must not allow the boy to gain momentum," he said finally. "If he retakes Harrenhal, he will control the Riverlands completely. We cannot allow that to happen." Tyrion leaned forward. "And what do you propose? Another battle? The last time we faced him on the field, he crushed us." Tywin's lips thinned. "No, we use politics, as we always have. We must turn the North against him." Kevan frowned. "The North follows him. Who would betray him now?" Tywin smirked. "The same man who was willing to before. Roose Bolton." At Harrenhal, Roose Bolton read Tywin's letter by candlelight, his face unreadable. Tywin's message was clear. Betray Robb, and the North would be his. Roose set the letter down, his fingers drumming on the table. With no Red Wedding, he had stayed at Robb's side longer than he had intended. He had expected to rule Winterfell by now, to install Ramsay as his heir and take the North for himself. But that had not happened. And now, Robb Stark still commanded an army too strong to betray outright. Bolton needed to play the long game. He would remain Robb's loyal bannerman, for now. But should the young wolf falter, Roose would be ready to strike. Robb's army moved quickly through the Riverlands. After a week's march, they reached Harrenhal. The Lannisters had fortified the ruins, but they were not prepared for the fury of the North. The battle was brutal. The Mountain's men fought with savage cruelty, but Robb's forces overwhelmed them. Arrows rained from the battlements. The Riverlords, seeking revenge for their burned villages, cut down Lannister men with no mercy. When the dust settled, Harrenhal belonged to Robb Stark, but something darker lurked within those walls. In one of the lower dungeons, Lady Mage Mormont found a dying prisoner. "King in the North," she said to Robb when she returned. "You should see this." They brought the man before Robb. His body was emaciated, his eyes sunken, his skin covered in bruises. But Robb recognized him instantly. "Lord Vargo Hoat," said Roose Bolton, stepping forward, "the man who once held this castle." The dying man wheezed, lifting his bloodied lips. "They are coming," he whispered. Robb frowned. "Who is coming?" "The lions," Vargo gasped. "And something worse." Then he fell limp, dead. The room was silent. Robb turned to his mother. "The Lannisters are planning something," he said. Catelyn nodded grimly. "And we need to be ready." Far to the north, beyond the wall, the real war was beginning. The dead were rising, and Westeros was still blind to the storm that was coming. The banners of the direwolf flew over Harrenhal, the castle now firmly in Robb Stark's hands. The Riverlords celebrated their victory, but Robb knew better. A single battle would not win the war. His mind was already on the next step. He stood in the war room, staring at a map of Westeros. To the west, the Lannisters still controlled the heart of the kingdom. To the east, the Vale remained closed off. And to the south, King's Landing loomed, untouched by northern steel. Catelyn Stark stood beside him, her face tense. "We need more allies, Robb. The Riverlands alone will not hold," Robb nodded. "I know. That's why I've sent word to the Vale." Catelyn's eyes widened. The Vale? Aye. My uncle Brynden rides for the Eyrie as we speak. If Lysa Arryn will honour her father's memory, she'll bring her knights into the war, his mother exhaled, looking away. Lysa has never been reliable. We don't need her to be, Robb said. We only need her knights. Rose Bolton watched. All of this with careful silence. Robb's growing power concerned him. The young wolf was not as reckless as he had hoped. If Robb continued down this path, he might actually win the war. That could not be allowed. Under the cover of night, Rose sent a raven. His message was simple. The boy still lives, but he is not invincible. I will find his weakness. The message flew south, straight into Tywin Lannister's hands. In King's Landing, Tywin read Rose Bolton's message with mild satisfaction. He had suspected the Lord of the Dreadfort would remain useful. We will let the North think they have the upper hand, he told his council. Then we will strike where they least expect. Tyrion, seated across from him, frowned. And where would that be? Tywin smiled thinly. The Iron Islands. Tyrion's eyes widened. You mean to unleash the Greyjoys? They are already unleashed, Tywin said. Balon Greyjoy will not wait long before making his own move. We will give him a push. While Robb prepared for his next battle, another warfront was about to open. In the north, the Greyjoys struck like a storm. Yara Greyjoy led the attack on Deepwood Motte. Torrhen's Square fell days later. The Dreadfort itself was under threat, but the true blow came when Theon Greyjoy returned to Pike. Balon Greyjoy looked at his son with disdain. You swore yourself to the wolf. Now you come crawling back? Theon gritted his teeth. The North is weak. I know their defences. Give me men, and I will take Winterfell. Balon studied him. Then he nodded. Do not fail me again. And so the Greyjoys turned their sails toward Winterfell. In the north, Maester Luwin stood at the broken gates of Winterfell. The castle was still a ruin, a shadow of what it once was. He had hoped that Bran and Rickon would be safe, but the ravens brought dire news. The Ironborn were coming, and Winterfell had no one left to defend it. The grey waves crashed against the shore as the Ironborn ships landed near the coast. Theon Greyjoy stood at the bow of his ship, gripping the hilt of his sword. The salt air filled his lungs, but he felt no satisfaction. He was coming home, to a place that had never truly been his. Behind him, 50 battle-hardened Ironborn warriors stood ready. They had no interest in glory, only plunder. Winterfell was weak, still half in ruins from Ramsay Snow's torching, and its defenders were few. This time, Theon muttered to himself, I won't fail. In Harrenhal, Robb Stark stood by the fire, a cup of wine in his hand, when the Raven arrived. Maester Luwin's words were hastily written but clear. Winterfell is under attack. The Ironborn have returned. His heart stopped. His home, his family's seat was under siege. His men, the Northmen who had followed him into war, saw the change in his face before he even spoke. My lords, Robb said slowly, voice steady but cold, the Greyjoys have betrayed us again. They take our lands while we fight the Lannisters. A silence fell over the room, broken only by the crackling fire. Lord Umber slammed his fist on the table. The bloody squid bastards won't get away with it this time. Rose Bolton, ever the strategist, spoke calmly. If you leave now, you divide our forces. The Lannisters will strike the Riverlands as soon as you're gone. Robb clenched his fists. His mother Catelyn stood beside him, her face lined with concern. Robb, we cannot afford to lose the Riverlands either. His mind raced. If he rode north, he could save Winterfell, but it would cost him the war. If he stayed, the North would suffer. Then a voice spoke from the shadows. Let me go, your grace. Robb turned. It was Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. I will take a force north, Brynden said. I will reclaim Winterfell in your name. Robb hesitated. Sending his uncle made sense. Brynden was a seasoned warrior, one of the best commanders they had, but it felt wrong not to be there himself. Still, he nodded. "Take as many men as you need. Save our home." Brynden bowed. "I will bring you Theon's head." Inside Winterfell, Maester Luwin gathered the remaining household guard. There were no great warriors left. Only a handful of men too old or wounded to fight in Robb's war. Rickon Stark, now only 6 years old, clung to Osha's cloak. She crouched beside him, whispering, "We have to leave, little lord. They'll kill us if we stay." The castle trembled as the Ironborn forced open the gates. Theon Greyjoy led them inside, stepping over the bodies of the few who had tried to resist. Winterfell was his, again. But his moment of triumph was short-lived. A scout rushed forward. "My lord, riders are coming from the west, a northern army." Theon's stomach twisted. "Who leads them?" he demanded. The answer came with the sound of hooves on stone, a banner unfurled in the wind. Not the dire wolf of Stark, but the flayed man of Bolton. Ramsay Snow grinned as he rode into the courtyard, his men surrounding Theon's. "You look nervous, Greyjoy," Ramsay said, dismounting. His mismatched eyes gleamed with amusement. "Did you think my father would let you keep Winterfell?" Theon's grip on his sword tightened. "I took this castle for my family. If you want it, you'll have to take it from me." Ramsay laughed. "Oh, I intend to." The Ironborn were outnumbered. The battle was short and brutal. Theon fought hard. But in the end, he was dragged from the keep, screaming. Ramsay took Winterfell, not for Robb Stark, but for himself. As Theon was thrown into the dungeons, shackles snapping around his wrists, he realized his greatest mistake. He had not taken Winterfell. He had delivered it into the hands of a monster. The freezing wind howled through the broken towers of Winterfell as Theon Greyjoy lay shackled in the dungeons. His body ached from the beating Ramsay Snow's men had given him. He had fought, but it hadn't mattered. Winterfell was lost again, this time not to him, but to something far worse. Outside, Ramsay stood in the ruined Great Hall, surveying his prize. The last stronghold of House Stark was now under his control. His father, Roose Bolton, had given him an order: hold Winterfell until the war was won. But Ramsay had his own ambitions. Winterfell would not be ruled by Starks again, not if he had anything to say about it. Far to the south, Sir Brynden Tully rode with a force of nearly 2,000 Northmen, Riverlords, and Freefolk scouts. His mission was clear: retake Winterfell for House Stark. The men rode hard, cutting through the frigid northern terrain. They carried banners of the direwolf, a symbol that still held power over the north. Word of their march spread fast. More men joined them along the way. Survivors from scattered houses, broken bannermen eager to fight against the traitorous Ironborn. But when they reached Winterfell, they found no Greyjoy banners flying. Instead, the flayed man of Bolton loomed over the gate. Brynden's face darkened. So the bastard has played his hand. A rider approached the gate under a flag of parley. A Bolton soldier sneered from atop the walls. "Go back to your Riverlands, old man," the soldier called. "Winterfell is under Lord Roose Bolton's protection." Brynden scoffed. "Tell your bastard master that I have come for my family's home." The soldier smirked. "Oh, you mean the home of the Starks?" His grin widened. "Tell me, Sir Blackfish, where are the Starks now?" Brynden clenched his jaw. "Prepare the siege weapons," he ordered. "We take it back by force." At Harrenhal, Robb Stark received the news with quiet fury. Winterfell had been taken from the Greyjoys, but it had not been saved. It had been stolen. Roose Bolton had not acted against him yet. He still rode under Stark banners. But this was a betrayal waiting to happen. Catelyn Stark paced the chamber, her face pale. "Robb, if Roose Bolton holds Winterfell, he may never give it back." Robb ran a hand through his auburn hair, frustration. burning in his chest. "I should have gone north myself," Lord Karstark, standing nearby, scoffed. "And abandoned the war? The Lannisters are waiting for us to weaken." "We are already weakened," Robb snapped. "The North is in chaos." The room fell silent. Finally he took a deep breath. "We cannot march north now, not yet, but we will not let Winterfell remain in Bolton hands." He turned to his mother. "I need you to go to White Harbor," he said. "House Manderley is still loyal. If we can rally the North behind us, we can drive out the Boltons for good." Catelyn hesitated. "And what of you?" Robb exhaled, looking at the map. "I march west. We take Casterly Rock. We cut the Lannisters down where it hurts." In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister read the latest reports from the Riverlands. Robb Stark had not turned back to reclaim Winterfell. Instead, he was marching west, toward Casterly Rock. Tywin's fingers curled around the parchment. "He means to strike at my home," he murmured. Tyrion, seated across from him, raised an eyebrow. "You seem almost impressed, father." Tywin ignored him. "Send word to Lord Tyrell. If Stark moves against the Rock, we will need reinforcements." Tyrion frowned. "And if the North rises against Bolton?" Tywin smirked. "Then the boy will have no home to return to." Far beyond the wall, another force was gathering. The long night was coming, and while men bled each other dry, the dead were marching south. The banners of House Bolton fluttered atop the scorched towers of Winterfell, the flayed man replacing the direwolf for the first time in centuries. The castle, still scarred from its previous sacking, was now occupied by men who were neither Greyjoy nor Stark, only butchers disguised as lords. Inside the great hall, Ramsay Snow lounged in the high seat once meant for the rulers of the North. He grinned as he chewed on a piece of roasted meat, his eyes gleaming with amusement as a bruised and broken Theon Greyjoy knelt before him. "You should thank me, Reek," Ramsay chuckled, wiping his mouth. "I saved you from your own stupidity. You took Winterfell and lost it. I took it and made it mine." Theon barely had the strength to glare at him. His spirit was breaking, just as Ramsay intended. But outside the castle walls, the storm was brewing. Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, stood atop a ridge overlooking Winterfell. His army, though smaller than the one Robb commanded, was full of seasoned northern warriors, men who had lost their homes to the Greyjoys and now saw them stolen by traitors. He did not have time for a siege. Winter was creeping closer, and if he waited too long, Ramsay would solidify his hold on the castle. They would take Winterfell tonight. Under the cover of darkness, the Northmen moved through the woods, their cloaks blending into the snow-covered landscape. Brynden led the first charge, cutting down the outer sentries before they could raise the alarm. The flayed man banners were ripped down as northern warriors stormed the gates. Winterfell belonged to the Starks, and the North was here to reclaim. Inside the keep, Ramsay was roused from his seat by the sound of war horns and steel clashing in the courtyard. A Bolton soldier rushed in, panting. "My lord, we are under attack!" Ramsay grinned. "Good. I was getting bored." He donned his armor, grabbed his flaying knife, and stepped outside. The battle for Winterfell had begun. Ramsay's men were skilled killers, but they lacked honor. And the Northmen knew the castle better than they did. The Blackfish's forces fought with vengeance, cutting down the Bolton men with brutal efficiency. Ramsay, however, did not care for honor or strategy. He thrived in chaos. He butchered his way through the enemy lines, laughing as he dismembered men alive. He reveled in their screams until he saw the Karstark banners among the invaders. His grin faded. Not all the North had forgotten their true. King, after all, far from the battle at Harrenhal, Robb Stark stared at a new message that had just arrived by Raven. The letter was sealed in black wax, bearing the sigil of House Bolton. His hands shook as he read the words. "The North belongs to the strong. Your war is lost. The Dreadfort stands with the victor." Robb crushed the parchment in his fist. His mother, Catelyn, watched him closely. "What is it?" "Roose Bolton has finally betrayed us," Robb said, his voice filled with quiet rage. His lords murmured in anger, but Robb did not shout. He did not break. Instead, he looked at the map, his mind sharpening like a blade. "Then we will deal with him," he said coldly. "Once the Lannisters fall, we return home. And take back the north." Lord Umber stepped forward. "You have our swords, your grace. Bolton's men will pay." In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister sat across from Lord Mace Tyrell, sipping wine as he listened to the reports. "Bolton has moved against Stark," Lord Tyrell said, chewing on a roasted pheasant. "The north is splintering." Tywin gave a satisfied nod. "Good. The more divided they are, the easier they will be to crush." But Tyrion, watching from the other side of the table, frowned. "You are playing with fire, father," he said. "The North does not forgive treachery. They may fight among themselves now, but if they reunite, they will be more dangerous than ever." Tywin waved a dismissive hand. "The North is a land of ice and ghosts. They will freeze before they become a true threat to us." Tyrion looked out the window toward the distant north. He wasn't so sure. Beyond the wall, the dead stirred. The White Walkers moved through the forests of the far north, their icy touch turning everything to frozen ruin. Men in Westeros fought, over castles and crowns, oblivious to the doom marching toward them. The real war had yet to begin. The snow fell thick over Winterfell as the last screams of battle faded into the wind. The Blackfish's forces had fought bravely, but the Bolton men had held the castle with savage determination. Now, the flayed banners of House Bolton still waved atop the broken towers. Sir Brynden Tully stood outside the ruined gates, his sword dripping with blood, his breath misting in the freezing air. He had cut down Ramsay's men by the dozens, but it had not been enough. From the castle walls, Ramsay Snow stood above him, grinning. "You fought well, old man," Ramsay called down, his voice mocking. "But this is my castle now, and I don't share." The Blackfish clenched his jaw. His men were exhausted, outnumbered and outmatched in the cold. He had no choice. "We fall back," he ordered. "For now." As the northern forces retreated into the wilderness, Ramsay watched them with a smirk. Let them run. He would hunt them down soon enough. Winterfell belonged to the flayed man now. Far to the south, Robb Stark stood before the golden walls of Casterly Rock. The young wolf had made his move. While the north burned, he had struck at the very heart of the Lannister power. The Westerlands were lightly defended, as Tywin had taken most of his forces to King's Landing. Now Robb's army surrounded the great fortress, their banners flying high. "This is it," Robb told his men, "the seat of the lions. If we take it, we break the Lannisters for good." His lords cheered, but inside the rock, Sir Jaime Lannister stood on the battlements, watching the enemy approach. His golden armor gleamed in the fading light. He smiled grimly. "Let's give the young wolf his last battle," he said. As Robb prepared for his greatest battle, another betrayal was unfolding. At the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton read the latest messages from King's Landing. Tywin Lannister had promised him the north if he helped bring down Robb Stark. And so Roose made his move. He sent ravens to his bannermen, ordering them to stand down. The northern lords, who were loyal to House Stark, would receive no reinforcements. Robb's kingdom was crumbling from within. While men fought over power, something far worse was rising. Beyond the wall, the White Walkers had reached the lands of the free folk. Thousands of wildlings had already fallen to them, their corpses rising again with glowing blue eyes. At Castle Black, Jon Snow stood atop the wall, watching the darkness grow. He had seen them with his own eyes. He knew what was coming, and yet the rest of Westeros was still blind. Jon clenched his fists. He had to warn them. But would they listen before it was too late? The battle for Casterly Rock was fierce. Robb Stark and Jaime Lannister clashed in the Fields outside the castle, their armies locked in bloody combat. Robb fought like a man possessed, cutting down Lannister men left and right. For a moment it seemed like victory was within his grasp, but then the Boltons arrived, not to help him, to betray him. Rose Bolton's men turned on the Stark forces, cutting them down from behind. Robb barely had time to react before Rose himself appeared in the chaos. "You should have died at the Twins, boy," Rose murmured, plunging his dagger into Robb's heart. The young wolf staggered, blood staining his armor, his vision blurred. The war was over. The North belonged to the Boltons. In King's Landing, Tywin, Lannister received the news with quiet satisfaction. "The war is won," he said, but he was wrong, because far to the north, the army of the dead was marching. Winter had come, and the realm was not ready. The end.